I woke up to the sound of violins. Not a ringtone. Not a neighbor's TV. Real, live violins. When I pulled the curtain back, I thought I was still dreaming. My front lawn, my personal, fenced-in, freshly fertilized patch of heaven, had turned into a full-blown wedding venue overnight. White chairs were arranged in rows, a flower arch stood proudly near the garden beds, and strangers in tuxedos and cocktail dresses were sipping mimosas as if they belonged there. A woman in a white bridal robe posed for pictures by my birdbath, her veil draped over my lawn gnome like it was part of the decor. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or call the police. But I did know one thing for certain. Someone was about to regret every single one of their life choices. It all started 2 weeks earlier when Karen, the HOA president from hell, told me, about donating my yard for her niece's wedding. I laughed, thinking she was joking. My yard wasn't part of HOA grounds. It was private property, bought years before the association was ever formed. But Karen treated everything within her line of sight as her personal kingdom. When I declined, politely but firmly, she gave me the trademark squint, lips pursed, hands on hips, that clipboard of doom pressed to her chest, and said, "It's just one day. Don't be difficult." I didn't hear another word after that. No flyers. No updates. No formal requests. Just silence. Which is why, standing there in my pajamas staring at my lawn-turned lovefest, I realized Karen hadn't taken my no as an answer. She'd taken it as a challenge. I stepped outside, phone in hand, heart pounding. I was halfway across the lawn when Karen spotted me. She waved like I was a welcome guest at my own home. "Good morning," she chirped, striding over in a linen pantsuit and sunglasses that looked like they were stolen from a cruise ship captain. "Don't worry, we're almost done setting up. The ceremony starts at 11. I blinked. "You're what?" "You're having a wedding. Here." She tilted her head. "Oh, come now. You said you were considering it." We took that as a soft yes. And honestly, it's the perfect spot. The park was already booked, and your grass is so much greener. My mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Karen, this is my private property. This lawn isn't part of the HOA. You had no permission." Karen's smile faded into a condescending smirk. "You're overreacting. It's just a few hours. No one's damaging anything. We'll clean up after. Besides, the bride's family made a generous donation to the HOA for the space. It's practically official." I stared at her. "You took money for access to my property?" She waved dismissively. "Look, if it's about recognition, we can mention your name in the program. With thanks to our gracious neighbor." I had to laugh, because the alternative was screaming. Or throwing a folding chair. My flower beds were crushed under chair legs. A champagne table had been set directly on top of my sprinkler system, and someone had parked a delivery van in my driveway. "You have 5 minutes to clear out," I said calmly, fingers curling tightly around my phone. Karen looked shocked, like I'd insulted her bloodline. "You'd ruin a wedding? Are you really that petty?" And there it was. That word. Petty. The same word Karen used every time someone didn't bend to her delusional sense of entitlement. The same word she once used when I asked her to stop letting her dog poop near my porch without cleaning it up. The same word she used when she fined another neighbor for putting up Halloween decorations too early. I looked at her and smiled. "No, Karen. I'm just getting started." I turned and walked back into my house before I did something regrettable. My phone was already ringing. Not to the cops. Not yet. I had a better plan. I called Earl's Septic service. "Earl," I said, "how early can you get here Saturday morning?" He laughed. "How early do you want? We've got a full pump and clean scheduled next week." "Big tank, right?" "Yup," I said. "Let's make it 6 a.m. sharp. Full service. Don't skimp on the suction." "You got it, boss," he said. "You expecting a party or something?" I grinned. "You could say that." The rest of the day, I pretended like nothing happened. I didn't argue. didn't shout. I let them decorate my lawn like it was theirs. Let them drive stakes into the earth and hang string lights in my trees. I even nodded politely at the caterers who asked if they could use my garden hose. But I also made a few strategic moves. I walked the perimeter and set up a couple of trail cameras. I documented everything. Every truck tire on my grass, every tent pole hole, every guest that wandered too close to my back porch. I watered the grass thoroughly, knowing it would soften and sink under too much foot traffic. And most importantly, I made sure my sprinklers were fully functional with manual override. Later that evening, Karen strutted up again, smug as ever. "Oh, and one small thing. Can you move that wheelbarrow by the side yard? It's a bit unsightly for photos." I nodded. "Of course. Happy to help." She blinked, clearly suspicious. "Really?" I smiled wider. "Absolutely. Anything for the bride." Because I knew something Karen didn't. Beneath that wheelbarrow, buried 3 feet below, was my septic tank lid. And at precisely 6 in the morning, a rumbling truck and a whole lot of suction were going to give this wedding a morning gift no one would ever forget. And I'd be watching it all, coffee in hand, from the best seat in the house. The morning before the wedding was unusually quiet. Too quiet. Karen and her crew had finished setting up by dusk the night before and had seemingly disappeared into the shadows to prep for the next day's festivities. I knew that silence was the kind that comes just before a tornado hit. But unlike most tornadoes, this one had been scheduled in advance. As the sky grew dark and the neighborhood tucked into their beds, I was wide awake, sipping coffee, running through the checklist in my head. Septic truck? Confirmed. Arrival time? 5:45 a.m. confirmed again. Cameras? Active. Phone battery? Charged. All I had to do now was wait for the show. I walked out just after midnight to inspect the lawn one last time. My yard looked like something out of a wedding magazine. String lights glowed faintly in the trees, a red carpet had been rolled from the driveway to the altar, and a professional PA system was sitting on a table near my hedge, ready to blast classical music. I saw at least 6 folding tables draped in ivory linen, set with polished glasses and name tags. I counted them carefully, not because I cared, but because every chair leg was pressing into my soil. Each inch was evidence, and I was gathering all of it. I went back inside, pulled the curtains, and slept for a solid 4 hours. When I woke, the clock read 5:28 a.m. I stretched, cracked my knuckles, and opened my bedroom window to let the crisp morning air in. That was when I heard it. A low, mechanical growl rolling down the street like a beast looking for breakfast. I slipped on my hoodie, grabbed my coffee, and stepped outside. Earl's truck was a glorious sight. Massive, rumbling, dented from years of hard work, and topped with a high-powered vacuum hose the size of a boa constrictor. It rolled to a stop right in front of my yard. Earl stepped out, wearing a cap that said, "Certified Crap Commander," and gave me a 2-finger salute. "Morning," he called. "Couldn't have asked for a better day," I replied. He grinned. "You ready for the full deluxe service?" "Let's make it loud," I said. He laughed and climbed onto the back of the truck, flipping switches and tugging levers like a man starting a carnival ride. The hose hissed to life, and within seconds, the air was filled with a deep churning sound. That unmistakable, wet slurping noise that says only one thing: something very unpleasant is being removed from somewhere deep and dark. Birds flew from nearby trees. A few porch lights flicked on in neighboring homes. Curtains twitched. At exactly 5:52 a.m., the first shriek pierced the air. The bride's mother, still in hair rollers, came staggering down the walkway in a silk robe that flapped like a flag of surrender. She was holding a can of air freshener, as if it were a magic wand that could battle sewage. "What is that smell?" she wailed. "It's a septic tank," I said cheerfully. "Getting it cleaned out. Routine maintenance. I scheduled it weeks ago." Her eyes widened in horror. "You can't do this now. The ceremony is in 5 hours. "I didn't know there was a ceremony," I said innocently. No one ever officially asked me. Karen appeared next, dressed in business casual battle gear, clipboard in hand, heels clicking with fury across my pavers. "Turn it off," she barked, pointing at Earl. "You're ruining everything." Earl glanced at me. I shrugged. "This is a public health procedure. Wouldn't want a backup during a big event, now would we?" Karen's face turned a shade of purple I hadn't seen before. "You did this on purpose." I sipped my coffee. "Karen, I've been living here for years. This is my property. I'm allowed to maintain it as I see fit. Besides, I hear the park's available next weekend." Behind her, the bride came into view, wrapped in a plastic garment bag and carrying a pair of high heels. Her makeup artist trailed behind her like a lost ghost. The moment she got a whiff of the air, she gagged and stumbled backward. "Oh my God, what is happening? Why does it smell like a porta-potty exploded?" Karen spun on her heel. "It's fine. It'll be over in a few minutes. We'll light some candles." The photographer, clearly regretting his career choice, mumbled something about how the lighting was better in the backyard, and started dragging equipment away from the septic zone. A groomsman attempted to carry a cooler past Earl's truck, but tripped over a hose and spilled cans of soda across my lawn. The bride screamed again. Earl didn't stop working. If anything, he revved the machine louder, the slurping echoing like a death rattle through the street. By 6:30 a.m., chaos had bloomed. Half the guests had arrived early and were loitering awkwardly on the sidewalk, trying not to breathe. A group of children had wandered near the truck and were promptly herded away by a frantic flower girl wielding a bouquet like a sword. The caterer arrived with trays of eggs and cheese platters and nearly dropped the entire load when he got a whiff of the air. "Are we next to a landfill?" he asked, pinching his nose. Karen ran up to me one more time, desperate. "Can't you just postpone it? Please. I'll pay you. Whatever it takes." I stared at her. "Karen, you trespassed, vandalized my lawn, and rented out my yard without permission. You want mercy now?" Her eyes softened. She looked smaller than usual. "It's my niece's big day." I tilted my head. "And you made it my problem. That's not how this works." She stood there for a few more seconds, her eyes darting back and forth, calculating, planning, thinking of another lie, another trick. But nothing came. Nothing could beat what was already happening. Earl's hose let out a final gurgle, and the sound of sludge being sealed into a steel tank marked the end of the extraction. The truck powered down with a long mechanical sigh. "I'll be back in an hour for the secondary flush," Earl called cheerfully. "Make sure everyone stays clear of the back hose. It gets jumpy." Karen walked away in silence, her heels sinking slightly into my overwatered grass. The bride was sitting on the garden bench, holding back tears as her veil fluttered in the breeze like a white flag of surrender. The smell wasn't going anywhere. Not for hours. The wedding was far from ruined, but it was no longer anything close to what Karen had promised. And the best part? I hadn't broken a single law. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't laid a hand on anything or anyone. I had simply cleaned my septic tank. At the most inconvenient time for the most inconsiderate person I knew. And the day was just getting started. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 11, but by 8:30, the entire front lawn looked like the aftermath of a natural disaster. The scent still lingered in the air like a curse, clinging to lace and chiffon, and the once pristine wedding setup now looked like it had been built in the center of a garbage dump. Guests stood around awkwardly, some fanning their noses with programs, others pacing back to their cars for temporary refuge. The bride sat frozen on a rented chair, her makeup already streaking from tears, while the groom stood beside her with the expression of someone trying to stay calm in front of a collapsing building. A breeze passed through the yard, lifting the veil slightly and dragging the scent deeper into the cluster of attendees. Someone gagged loudly, and a child started crying. Karen, to her credit, still marched around barking orders as if everything could be salvaged by sheer willpower. She tried to reposition the food tables to the far side of the yard, away from the septic tank and the stains on the grass left by the suction hose. It didn't help. The wind betrayed her every move, blowing the odor straight across the tables. One of the guests lifted the lid on a tray of mini quiches and immediately slammed it shut with a dry heave. The cake arrived in the middle of this chaos, and the delivery guy almost dropped it when he stepped into the yard and caught his first breath. He shoved the tiered monstrosity into Karen's arms and jogged back to his van without another word. At 9, Earl returned with the same friendly smile and the same roaring truck. He waved at me as if we were at a block party. Karen, who had been trying to direct someone setting up a portable arch, spun around like she'd been shot. No, absolutely not. You said you were done. Earl shrugged. Scheduled a secondary flush. Big tank like that? Needs a double pass. It's in the paperwork. Karen turned on me like a bloodhound. You did this on purpose. You scheduled him twice. I calmly sipped my coffee, which I had made extra strong for this moment. Karen, you wouldn't want raw sewage leaking out during your niece's vows, would you? This is basic sanitation. You're the one who said it's important to maintain property appearances. She stormed off muttering, but there was nothing she could do. The HOA had no power over my property. No legal authority, no jurisdiction. She had no grounds to stop me. If anything, she was the trespasser here. As the vacuum fired up again and the machine resumed its deep, wet churning, I saw guests begin retreating to their cars, shaking their heads. A woman in a floral dress pulled out her phone and began filming discreetly. I didn't blame her. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a spectacle. Around 9:30, the real show began. A shouting match broke out between the bride and Karen, loud enough that even Earl stopped working to listen. The bride was furious. She demanded to know why they hadn't just rented the community park like everyone else. Karen tried to defend herself, citing budget constraints and aesthetic appeal, but it quickly unraveled when the bride revealed that the park had been available and Karen had lied. The niece turned on her heel and stomped off toward the neighbor's driveway. The groom followed her, holding his tuxedo jacket over his face like a gas mask. Meanwhile, the groomsmen were gathered near my garage, one of them nervously glancing at me as if I might toss them off the property at any second. I didn't. I just watched, because I knew the weight of what was happening now wasn't just the smell or the ruined ceremony. It was the realization sinking in that everything had been built on a lie. Karen had orchestrated a wedding on stolen space, took HOA funds to cover the decorations, and failed to secure the basic dignity of a respectful conversation with the homeowner. All of it was collapsing around her in real time. I glanced across the street and noticed some of my neighbors had come out to watch from their porches. Mr. Jensen had his lawn chair out and was waving at me with a beer in hand, despite the early hour. Mrs. Alvarez from 2 doors down had her phone angled perfectly to catch the chaos. It was an unspoken agreement in the neighborhood. Everyone had a Karen story. Today, they were all here for the finale. Karen, desperate to save face, tried to move the ceremony inside. She approached me again, this time with a more calculated tone. "Look," she said, "we both know this got out of hand. But the ceremony is supposed to be the happiest day of a young couple's life. If we just move things inside your home, just the vows, 10 minutes, I'll personally ensure everything is cleaned up afterward." I stared at her like she'd just asked me to adopt a nest of hornets. "You want to bring 40 people into my house. The one you broke onto the lawn of. Without asking. Without paying. And now, without apology." She hesitated. "It's just 10 minutes. I stepped closer. "Karen, if one person sets foot past that front step, I'm calling the sheriff. And trust me, he's not a fan of yours either." She flinched slightly, then tried to mask it with a smile. "You've made your point." "Have I?" I said quietly. "Because the wedding isn't ruined because of the smell. It's ruined because of you." She didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, heels crunching over the gravel as the noise of the septic truck roared louder behind her. At 10:30, a small crowd formed near the arch, where the bride stood with her groom, clearly trying to salvage whatever shred of ceremony remained. The guests formed a haphazard semicircle, many of them holding tissues to their noses. The officiant began speaking into a handheld mic that kept cutting out. Behind them, Earl started packing up, the tank now full and sealed tight. The smell still hovered, heavier now, hanging low over the lawn like a final insult. Just as the bride was saying her vows, the wind shifted again. A gust of air carried a thick wave of odor directly into the congregation. Several people stepped back. One old man nearly tripped over a flower pot. The bride stopped mid-sentence and started to sob. No one clapped when the vows were finished. There was no cheering. Just awkward silence and the slow shuffle of people heading back to their cars, waving goodbye with one hand and pinching their noses with the other. The reception was cancelled before it started. The catering trays remained untouched. The cake never made it out of its box. Karen sat alone on one of the chairs, her clipboard lying in the grass, forgotten. Her perfect HOA illusion had been obliterated. And the best part? I hadn't lifted a finger beyond making a few calls and drinking a lot of coffee. Everything that had happened was just the result of her own arrogance colliding with reality. And there was still more to come. The Monday after the disaster, my phone rang before I'd even made it out of bed. It was George, one of the quieter members of the HOA board, someone who rarely involved himself in Karen's theatrics but had always seemed like he was quietly keeping score. His voice was tight, urgent, and laced with frustration. He asked if I had a moment to talk, and I told him to give me 10 minutes to get dressed and meet him on the porch. When he arrived, he didn't come alone. 2 other board members were with him, Janine, who usually nodded along to Karen's every word, and Mark, who once tried to fine a neighbor for painting their mailbox blue. They stood on my porch like schoolchildren about to confess to the principal. George cleared his throat and said they needed to speak to me privately, off the record, and I agreed on one condition: they sit and listen before interrupting. They nodded. I didn't hold back. I laid out everything: Karen's trespassing, the unauthorized setup, the damage to my lawn, the threats she made, and most importantly, the financial arrangement she claimed existed between the HOA and the bride's family. George's eyes widened when I mentioned the payment. Mark rubbed his forehead and muttered that he had never signed off on any transaction, nor had any discussion about a wedding on private property. Janine looked like she'd been hit by a slow-moving truck. It turned out Karen had forged board consensus by slipping in vague language into last month's meeting summary, something about allocating funds for community outreach events. No one had read the fine print. She'd used that clause to justify thousands of dollars being spent on tent rentals, catering support, and flower arrangements, all of it under the HOA's budget line. As we sat there, George quietly pulled a folded envelope from his pocket and handed it to me. Inside was a printed receipt from the wedding planner, billed directly to the HOA's community event fund, and signed with Karen's signature. It was dated a full week before she even asked me for permission. She never intended to ask anyone. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a well-intentioned error. It was fraud, plain and simple. I asked them what they intended to do about it. George glanced at the others, then said there would be an emergency board meeting that evening. Karen was to be suspended pending investigation. I made sure to be present at that meeting. Not because I had to be, but because I wanted her to look me in the eye while her little empire came crumbling down. The meeting was held in the HOA clubhouse, with folding chairs hastily arranged and a dozen community members in attendance, most of whom had heard about the wedding fiasco through whispered gossip and social media snippets. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, clearly expecting a warm welcome and a chance to spin the story. Instead, she walked into a room filled with crossed arms, furrowed brows, and more than a few cell phones recording in plain view. George opened the meeting with a list of grievances: misuse of funds, unauthorized event planning, and unauthorized use of private property. Karen tried to cut him off, waving her hands and talking over him, claiming it was a misunderstanding and that no one had objected. But then Mark read aloud the HOA bylaws, which clearly stated that all events involving community funds must be voted on in public session, with recorded minutes and written approval from at least 3 board members. That had never happened. Janine, now shockingly vocal, added that Karen had not only failed to get permission, she had outright lied about having it. Karen's face twisted from defensiveness to desperation. She turned toward me in the crowd and started to say my name like I was going to back her up, as if we were co-conspirators. I held up my phone and began playing the audio I had recorded the morning of the wedding, where she said, word for word, that I had softly agreed, and that she had taken my silence as permission. The room went quiet except for the playback of her own smug voice. By the end of the meeting, a vote was held. Karen was removed from the presidency effective immediately, pending a formal investigation into budget abuse. She protested, threatened lawsuits, and claimed to have influential friends. Nobody blinked. She was escorted out by George, who did so with the weary calm of a man who had waited a long time for this moment. Over the next few days, the aftermath spread like wildfire. The bride's meltdown had been captured by 3 separate smartphones and posted online under titles like Septic Wedding Gone Wrong and Bride Breaks Down Over Sewer Smell. One of the videos was shared by a popular meme page and racked up hundreds of thousands of views within 48 hours. Karen's face was everywhere, frozen mid-scream, her clipboard clutched like a lifeline. People from other towns started commenting with their own HOA horror stories. She had become a symbol overnight, a meme of mismanagement. Then came the real fallout. The bride's family filed a complaint with the county clerk, demanding to know how the event had been approved on private property. When it was revealed that no permit had ever been issued, the county launched its own inquiry into the HOA's activity. That triggered an audit. And audits don't stop at one wedding. They dig. And when they dug, they found more. Improper fines, incomplete expense logs, payments that went nowhere, things Karen had signed off on without backup documentation. Meanwhile, I had hired a landscaping crew to assess the damage to my lawn. They reported crushed soil, bent sprinkler heads, and torn up flower beds. The estimate for repairs was over $3,000. I filed a civil claim against Karen directly, not the HOA, for trespassing and property damage. With the security footage and receipts I'd saved, my lawyer said it was open and shut. The court agreed. She was ordered to pay restitution within 60 days. A few neighbors who had once defended her came by quietly to apologize. One of them, an older woman named Grace, told me she had been afraid to speak out before because Karen made her feel like she'd be fined for breathing too loudly. We laughed about it over lemonade, and it felt like, for the first time in years, this neighborhood might actually start healing. The final blow came when Karen's employer found out about the viral video. Apparently, she had listed her position on LinkedIn as Community Development Officer, and the company wasn't thrilled to be associated with someone who organized a wedding on stolen property next to an open septic tank. Her profile vanished 2 days later. No public statement. Just gone. And for the first time in a long while, there was peace on my street. No clipboard threat. No HOA letters about mailbox height or porch decor. Just the sound of sprinklers humming across newly planted sod, and the occasional chuckle from a neighbor still watching the viral wedding meltdown on their phone.